We back. And this week, we're going to be talking some soccer. Near and dear to my heart, but I want to kind of get into the current events of what's going on. This week, the Champions League quarterfinals for UEFA are kicking off, and there are some absolutely tasty games. I think, being a Liverpool fan myself, having them go up against PSG out of France is going to be a really good one. Two German giants in Bayern Munich and Bayer Leverkusen, and two Spanish teams going at each other with a deep hated rivalry in Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid. I think the interesting thing here is this is a new format, right? We kind of talked a couple weeks ago about all-star games, and leagues are always trying to improve or make more money or get new viewership numbers or whatever the case may be, whatever their reasoning is. There's always some sort of change going on. And I mean, this Champions League format that's been going on for decades, or at least the new round of 16 that's been going on for close to 2 decades. The UEFA comes out a couple of years ago and they say, hey, we're going to change some things up. We're going to this new model. It's called the Swiss model. So traditionally, what they used to do, go groups of 4. You play everybody home and away twice. There's your 6 games, happens during the regular season, and after those 6 games, the top 2 from your group will advance onto this knockout round. Your third place team will go bump down into the Europa League, and your fourth place team is out. Well, that's gone now. This was the first year they did away with it. It brings new teams into the fold. So what they did is it's a giant group stage where there's more teams, and it's randomized for who you're playing. So you have more games now. So instead of the 6, now you're playing 8. So you're playing 4 home games and 4 away games. You don't play the same team twice. So every one of those 8 games are going to be different. And the hope was that the smaller fish, right, these teams from not major leagues, or maybe major leagues, but they aren't your top 4 traditional powerhouse teams that are there. Maybe this gives them a different opportunity to try to advance. I would think that one of the criticisms that happens, right, if you're a Bayern Munich or a Real Madrid and you get grouped up against a Copenhagen or even a Dutch team like a PSV or an Ajax who aren't from major leagues, when you have to play them twice home and away, traditionally you're going to see those bigger teams win. And that was the case over the course of the last however many years and decades. But I think the hope was, hey, if we go to these one-off games where if I'm a smaller team, maybe I can just game plan. Maybe I can get my guys up for one game and we can go and pick up 3 points. And there were some surprise results. But at the end of the day, you're still looking at who advanced from that stage, who made it to the playoff round is what they called it. So the top 8 teams in this group stage, which was Liverpool, Barcelona, Arsenal, Inter Milan, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Lille, and Aston Villa, advanced straight into the round of 16. The next 16 teams went into this kind of knockout phase where then they were grouped up. They were drawn against another one of those knockout teams based off of seeding and said, hey, now you have to go play a home and away. And whoever wins that matchup then gets to punch their ticket to the round of 16. So basically these teams who didn't qualify straight into the round of 16, now you have to play 2 more games in an already congested schedule, right? They have 30 to 40 games that they're playing for the regular season. Then you're looking at extra cup games, domestic cup games, players being gone for international breaks, injuries on top of all of that. Now you're throwing, hey, we went 8 group games instead of 6. Now we're going 2 extra games if you didn't automatically qualify. So there's a lot of soccer going on. It's easy to get confused. I'm watching the kind of broadcast from CBS or Paramount Plus as it's going on, and they have people in the studio who are explaining it to you while the game's going on, saying, hey, if this team scores this goal or this team doesn't win, here is who's going through. Here is what those rankings look like. Like, that's how confusing it was, is they had people who were trying to explain it to their viewers. So while I do think that as time goes on, I do think it'll become the new normal. It'll become easier for people to follow, for people to understand. This was the first year, right? Change is hard for anything. But I kind of want to talk about where it's at right now. So we had the initial playoff or play-in knockout games. So now you're down to your final 16. And I think one of the reasons that people were excited about this is, again, they were hoping for parity. They were hoping that, hey, does this format give maybe a leg up to these teams who aren't these giant clubs or aren't these clubs that have tremendous continental success? And I went back last 16 years or so for Champions League since they went to this, the 16-team knockout, or round of 16, I should say, and kind of wanted to go and look at who are the teams that are consistently qualifying. Why are they doing it? Right. So, and if parity is one of the things that they're looking for with this new Swiss model, did they achieve it? Did they achieve it in year one? Is it something that they're going to be able to look back on and say, hey, no, everybody should be behind this because there were big upsets or there were Cinderella runs? I think that's something that makes March Madness for both the men's and the women's side for college basketball so interesting. Is on any given day, you could have a Drake or a Butler or Kentucky lose in the first round, or you could have any of these big teams or these small teams pull off crazy upsets, crazy games, and I think it adds a lot of intrigue. It makes it a little bit different. It spices it up a little bit. But for what the how UEFA kind of ranks these teams is, it's called the club coefficient. So basically, to kind of sum it all up, they add the points that the club has acquired in these competitions over the last 5 years. So it's not like a 1 year thing, it's a 5-year coefficient, and at the end of every 5th year that number drops off and they'll add the next year on. So if you win a lot of trophies or you're constantly advancing deep, you make deep runs into these tournaments, your coefficient is going to be higher than somebody who doesn't even qualify or who somebody is getting knocked out in the group stage every year. But seems like a pretty reliable model to know who are your European giants, your teams that are expected to win, your teams that are expected to make it to the semifinals or at least make it to the quarterfinal matchups every year. But kind of looking at that, of the top 30 teams in Europe right now, this year, 14 of them have advanced into the final 16 of this year's Champions League. So that tells me that there's only two real, I guess you could use the word Cinderellas, right? Aston Villa, which would be one out of England. Nobody expected them to make the run that they're on, and they don't have this pedigree of European success recently. I know they do decades ago, before I was born. But that's one. And then your second team that, again, hasn't cracked that top 30 yet would be Lille out of France. So there was a year in there that they didn't make European competition at all, and that doesn't add any points to their coefficient. But if you're looking at only two of those teams being minnows, right, we'll call them, or Cinderella teams, everybody else in there, those are your mainstays. These are the same teams that make it year after year, that advance to the round of 16 year after year. So is it really giving these other teams an opportunity? Right, I mean, if you go back, the 2 years that stick out to me that had the most, the 2017-18 season and the 18-19 season, all 16 of the teams that advanced to the round of 16 were all in the top 30 in Europe. So there were no surprises. Every single team there was supposed to be there. Every single team there had shown over the last couple of years that that's who they were. There were no surprises. And both of those years, you had Real Madrid beat Liverpool in the final, and then in 18-19, Liverpool makes it back to the final and beats Tottenham. So no surprises. Those teams were there. Now, of the years that did have the most surprises, the 2011-2012 season and last year, actually, the 23-24 season, there were 4 teams in both of those years that were not in the top 30. That tells me, or that should say numbers-wise, hey, there were surprises. There were teams who weren't supposed to be there. And then to kind of drill down on the 11-12 season, the Cinderella run that was made, that was by Apoel out of Cyprus. They won their group, which is unheard of. It was like one of the biggest surprises of that season. And then not only did they win their group, they got matched up with French side Lyon in the quarterfinals, in the round of 16, and then they advanced to the quarterfinals after beating Lyon in penalties. And it was this big win for these smaller teams that were never really given that respect, especially when you're matched up against, your French sides, English sides, Italian, Spanish, whatever. You're almost kind of seen as like, hey, you're going to get it walked all over. Congrats for being here. You get your paycheck for advancing, but we want these other teams to play now. And it's hard because not everybody's a fan of the biggest teams in each country, right? Even Barcelona, who's gone through a little bit of a dip the last couple of years, they're looking good this year, but they're still a historically great side. Historically, they have so many titles, so many championships, these players who are mainstays and are household names, but you're looking at they're going to play against Benfica this week for their first leg. If you're looking at what the coefficient says and what these numbers say, yeah, Barcelona should roll. But that's a pretty heavyweight matchup. There's no surprises in there. The only two, like I said, that stick out this year, that Aston Villa against Club Brugge out of Belgium, I think would be an interesting one. Villa don't have that pedigree over the last couple of years, but they're having a good season. And then your other one would be Lille out of France versus Borussia Dortmund out of Germany. Dortmund's been there consistently for 10, 11 years now. This is something that they're at the standard where they are constantly competing, including making it to the final over 10 years ago against Bayern Munich. But I think the issue is when we look back and we want to say, hey, is there parity in the Champions League? Did this work? Are there going to be teams that are looking at this model and saying, no, next year is our year? Because of the way that this is going to break down, we now have a chance when we didn't prior. So of the last 16 years, like I talked about, the titles have gone to only 6 different teams. So 16 years of the competition, only 6 different teams have won it. And 4 of those teams have won it more than once. Chelsea's won it twice. Bayern Munich's won it twice. Barcelona's won it 3 times. Real Madrid's won it 6 times. That's it. So none of these other teams who are even your big European teams who have competed in the 80s, 90s, or even early 2000s, just of the last 16 years, that's been it. There has been no parity. There has been no, I wonder who's going to win it this year. There's been a couple upsets earlier, round of 16 quarterfinals, but no real surprises once you get to the end of the tournament. And I think, to me, that says something is wrong. If you can kind of predict who's going to be winning the title every year, I think something is wrong with the model, right? If you wanted to look at the NFL as an example, right? Dynasties happen. Of course they do. Patriots went on a run. I would say the Chiefs had, maybe if they had won their 3rd this year, but they're currently probably the leading dynasty. But everybody's looking at, how can I stack these titles? How can I win 2 in a row, or 3 out of 4, or 5 out of 8 or 9 years? That stands the test of time. That says, hey, I'm the best team in the league. I am the best team over the last 5 to 10 years. We are a team that's going to be here for a while. Real Madrid has done that. Right? Barcelona had a run where they did that. But is that good for the sport? In the NBA, if you were to tell me right now that the Boston Celtics were going to go back and win the title again this year, I think people would agree with you, but I don't think they're the hottest team in the NBA right now. There's other teams that are up there competing. It's not a straight shot for them to just go, hey, we won it last year, we're going to win it again next year. There is a little bit more of, there's other competition in the way. There's other teams that are hot. There are players who are playing really well. I would say hockey's another great example of it. You're looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning had a nice little run. The Florida Panthers have been really competitive. The Carolina Hurricanes have been really competitive. But I couldn't tell you right now who's going to win. Sure, there's a favorite, but I couldn't tell you right now who's going to win the Stanley Cup. So what can UEFA do to try to incentivize these smaller teams and try to give them, maybe level the playing field a little bit? And I think they're on the right track with trying to get these other teams in and not having them locked up with 2 games against the European giant like they were in the previous group stage. But I think the issue is nothing's changed, right? If you look at, those were the 2 years that had huge Cinderella runs. There's nothing going on this year. Could Aston Villa make a run this year? Could Lille make a run? Absolutely. Is it likely that they're going to? I don't think so. When you're having to play 2 games, a home and away, you're looking at it's probably just going to be the best side that wins. Now, if you really want to spice things up, and maybe you do move it to a March Madness style bracket, maybe it is just a one game. Maybe you move to a neutral, or maybe just the higher seed hosts, and you move to a one game playoff. Winner advances, that's it. If it's tied, maybe we go straight to penalties, right? Add a little, that's going to add some spice to the game for sure. But there's no guarantee that these bigger sides win a one game playoff. Right, again, we'll talk upsets, but when you look at the playoff round previously for the teams 9 through 24 that advanced into that playoff round, here were the upsets. Club Brugge was the 24th ranked team, beat Atalanta out of Italy, who were the 9th ranked team, beat them across both games, 2-1 and 3-1. Juventus, who was the 20th ranked team out of Italy, ended up losing to PSV Eindhoven out of Holland across both games. But in the first game, Juventus beat them 2-1. Other big upsets that you're looking at, the only other one was Feyenoord out of the Netherlands, beat AC Milan in the first game 1-0, tied them 1-1 in the second game. They advance. But there is precedent for these lower ranked, in quotations, teams beating a higher ranked team in a single game. Why don't you do that across the whole playoffs? If you're trying to move to a place where every team feels like they have a equal chance, or at least a fighting chance to be able to go in, play one of these big teams, maybe come out with a result, that's what's going to bring that viewership. Now, again, if you're looking at just the dollars and cents of it and what's best for the business, having these big teams in these big TV matchups, that's what sells the tickets. That's what gets the sponsors on board. I understand that. Real Madrid competing every year, one of the biggest clubs in the world. Of course you're going to get more people signed on to watch those games. But if you're looking at growing this and you want to make this tournament into something that attracts more than just your European giants, I think you need to move it to a one-game playoff. Hey, here's who we got matched up against. We got to go to them. A winner moves on. It's just one game. That is how you're going to add some intrigue and add a little bit of craziness. So, like I said, take a page out of March Madness's book, see what happens. As far as what this year looks like, if you want to talk favorites, Liverpool were the top-ranked team in the group stage. Barcelona was 2. I would say those are obviously your top 2 teams who could pull it off. Real Madrid's always going to be a team that competes, even though they were ranked 11th. Bayern Munich ranked 12, but same thing. They're all consistently there. Besides that, those are your top 4. Inter Milan has been good recently. Arsenal had a good couple of seasons. I don't really see an opportunity for a Benfica or a Feyenoord or Aston Villa or Club Brugge to really make a run deep into the semifinals and championship. It hasn't happened. It just doesn't happen. It's going to be one of these big teams who have the best players, have the deepest bench, have the best coaches, and that's what happens. So that's kind of my spiel on what's going on with the Champions League. I liked the Swiss model. I thought it brought something a little different to maybe what was getting a little stale, which was the previous model. But as much as the group stage was tweaked, I really think the knockout stage it needs some changes. Right? I guess if you want to look back at college football playoff that was introduced several years ago, but tweaked again this year when you added more than just the 4 teams into it, the single game style, it doesn't really matter who your higher seed is. Oregon could have been or was the top team in the nation. But when it comes down to, hey, a single game, here is where we're playing. It's a neutral venue. It's you versus us. Who's going to win? That matchup could favor either side. Who knows who's going to show up and be the better team that day? Who's going to show up and have a better game plan that day? That's what adds the intrigue. Yes, could Oregon have gone all the way through, won the national title, and said, hey, we were the best team in the country? Absolutely. But you still got to play the game. So why not? Why not make it, if you want to do a neutral venue, great. If you want to do it's based off of region, which would be like March Madness, great. If not, do the home side. Home side hosts. See what happens in a one-game playoff. Right? Most of these leagues, most of these domestic leagues have that with their domestic cups, with the FA Cup or Copa del Rey in Spain or the Italian Cup. But for some reason in the Champions League, they really want to stick to this home and away. But that definitely, I think, favors the better team. So the better team has a much better chance over 2 games, over at least 180 minutes of soccer, to say, hey, we can beat you. But I don't know. That's just, of course, my team, the team that I support is the top seed right now. And, of course, I'm hoping that they can do it. And I think over 2 games that we could beat PSG out of France. But if it was a 1-game playoff, man, you're holding your breath the whole time. Who knows what can happen over 1 game? So that's it. Just wanted to talk a little bit of soccer. Excited kind of what's going forward. We got a couple things that are currently on the back burner for what could be going on over the next couple of weeks and months. NFL draft is coming up. Baseball season starting up. March Madness starts up in a couple of weeks. So plenty to talk about. As always, follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Smash that like and subscribe button. And we'll see you next week.